Hello and welcome to Question and Answer Time number 19. I'm your host, Adam Neely. I'm here answering all of your questions about bass and music in general, so let's get started. Question and Answer Time with Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you who have subscribed to my Patreon. I really appreciate the fact that you would part with your hard-earned dollars. That's really awesome. We met our first stretch goal, which was to get better lights than these, which are Home Depot lights. So thank you for making that possible. And let me readjust this again. Okay, here we go. First question.
Hey Adam, any tips of how to conduct whilst playing bass? I've seen you play some stuff with one hand. Obviously you'd want to minimize that. Thanks.
So conducting essentially is just a way of you trying to show other musicians in an ensemble where the downbeat is. It's just a way of getting everybody in sync with one another. Yes, that can mean as a bass player that you're going to be conducting using traditional patterns in one hand and tapping with the other. But for the most part, it can just take the form of like doing a head nod at a certain point, or taking your bass and with the headstock going downbeat, downbeat. And that's usually what it is just a means of like, hey, everybody, this is where we are. It's harder to follow the bass player if you're another musician or a singer. It's much easier to follow the keyboard player or the drummer. But if you are going to conduct as a bass player, just make whatever gestures you are using very clear.
You should explore in detail about end goals for musicians. You were talking about how the idea of being the best musician or playing as fast as someone is not ideal because you will never feel good enough. What about the idea of being better or faster than what you are now? There probably wouldn't be an issue of being good enough because the goal is continually changing as the player changes. Would that not work? I also like the idea of using the notion of love of music / practicing / playing as justification of why you do it. It's something I don't acknowledge, but it's probably the most important thing to acknowledge.
So I was talking a little bit in that live stream about the idea of a goal. And a lot of people when they're first starting out have an idea of like, if I do this, then I will become fulfilled as a musician. In the beginning, maybe it's like, I want to play guitar to get women. And don't worry, you won't ever fulfill that goal because realistically, no woman actually wants to be with a guitar player. But then you play a little bit more and then you get better at shredding. And so then maybe you think, oh, hey, I'm going to be as good as this person at shredding and that's going to be my goal. And then I'm going to attain happiness, whatever that is. Along the way, you kind of realize, well, even if you get to that level, what then? Is it to then be able to shred faster than anybody has in humanity? Well, what then? What if you are able to do that? Are you finally able to achieve inner musical peace? I'm of the opinion that you really should focus on the whole process of the thing. Set small, manageable goals that you know you will achieve, and then always be looking at the next goalpost. Never look at the goal as an arrival point. It's a way of just keeping the ball moving forward.
Interesting thoughts. However, I feel like you're missing the mark.
So if you're ever interested in seeing what it's like to be a classical musician and have your feelings hurt, read the comment section of the how and why classical musicians feel music differently. Now, I don't mean to be a huge dick about it, so I'm sorry about that. But since that video came up, there hasn't been a lot in the way of rebuttal to any of the points that I was making in any sort of serious way. There definitely have been some good points raised and some corrections that I've addressed in previous Q&As. But as long as that video is up, there are going to be classical musicians that really take umbrage with what I was saying. So sorry about that.
Thank you for that, Adam. I really wish I could, but I'm working 2 part-time jobs just to keep my head above water, which is why
So it's fine. Don't worry about it. I will not hold it against you if you don't contribute to my Patreon. Seriously. Man, enjoy the free content as it is because it's always going to be free and I'm always going to be releasing content on a weekly basis and it's going to be for the masses. And don't worry about it. I totally understand. My Patreon is mainly just a way for people who, if they have the means to, can support me. It's a very, very simple thing. Don't think of it as like, oh my God, I have to support him. Don't worry about it.
What's the point of all this when it just sounds bad? Like, why? Can you explain? Does it sound good to some people? I'm not hating, but just genuinely curious.
So I like this stuff because it genuinely interests me. It's not something that I'm just putting on airs. I'm not just like messing with anybody when I say that I like this polytonality, when I like the half step down. I like it because it's something that's very different. And I've listened to a lot of music in my lifetime. I've been exposed to music all across the board, and I really have the sound, the typical diatonic scale in my ear cold. It is just there. It is there constantly, and it's there around me every time I go to the grocery store. It's there around me whenever I hear anything being played. So anytime that I get a respite from that, when I get something that's slightly off, I'm like, oh, wait a second, I have not heard this before. What is this? This is interesting. And it's a way of keeping the mystery alive in a way. How do I approach this thing that I don't understand? And can I understand it? doesn't make enough sense, and then can I use it? That's the value in it, and I totally understand if it sounds bad to you. It's not for the faint of heart by any stretch, but for somebody whose ears have been oversaturated with the diatonic scale, it does give a really interesting approach.
Now, can you do a video on how to turn jazz fusion into a viral video?
You should ask Wolfpack about that. They somehow are able to make really, really hip music into viral videos and consistently do it over and over and over again. Check out Wolfpack.
What about different modes with the same key center, like A major and A minor, or B flat Phrygian and B flat blues scale played by different voices?
I would call that polymodality, where you have the same tonic but then different modes and different voices. I've also heard the term polyscalarity used by theorist Dmitri Tymoczko, I think is how you pronounce his name. Maybe not. But they're all kind of similar ideas for a similar effect.
I too have mixed feelings about my time at Berklee. When were you there?
So I graduated Berklee in August of 2009, and Roger Brown was the president then, and he is now. And I think Berklee has actually made a lot of great changes since he became president. A lot of things, of course, I would change, but it is a really well-run operation. When I first applied to get into Berklee, you didn't actually have to audition. All you had to do is just fill out an application as if it was any other school, and then they would accept you based upon, who knows, your grades, your essay, I don't know. But you did have to audition to get a scholarship. And so I auditioned and I got some scholarship, but I actually didn't get into Berklee. I was waitlisted and I didn't actually start Berklee until January of 2007. The old system at Berklee was that they would accept basically anybody based upon whatever criteria they felt like that day, and regardless of musical talent. So essentially the first semester or two, they would be completely overwhelmed by the class load and then flunk out, but Berklee would still cash their check. That system might have been well for Berklee's finances, but definitely not well for its reputation. And so the acceptance rate might have been very high, but the graduation rate was very low. Not a good look. Now it's a lot better. The acceptance rate is a lot lower and the graduation rate is a lot higher. That's good.
I still feel like the flavor of polytonality is just a result of it, meaning we approach dissonance and chromaticism in a way we perhaps otherwise wouldn't. Not really its own auditory phenomenon. I could be wrong. I'll try focusing on the different lines with headphones. But even then, wouldn't it just be training our ears to focus on one of the tonal centers whilst we hear the chromaticisms caused by the other key we've written in simultaneously? Two tonal centers existing simultaneously doesn't really sit with me as a possible tangible phenomenon.
There's a really interesting paper you should read, and I've linked it in the description, that's written by Dmitri Tymoczko. Again, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he talks about this. Like, maybe you can't actually hear everything at the same time, but you can still follow both simultaneously in the same way that you can kind of hear like a clarinet player in one side of the room playing the Star-Spangled Banner and a saxophone player in the other side of the room playing God Save the Queen. You can still hear them independently of one another and still follow both roughly at the same time, even if they aren't one homogeneous whole.
Is it bad to say one day I want to do exactly what you're doing? And how would you recommend I go about doing it?
No, it's definitely not bad, but maybe your parents might think it's bad if they are not enlightened to what it means to be a creative professional. One thing that I would encourage everybody to do is share that video with anybody who might think that music is not a job. Music is definitely a job with a lot of professional responsibility and something that really requires a lot of time in order to make work. As far as how to go about doing this, my big advice is to meet as many people as you can and develop as big a network as you can, because the more people that you know, the more opportunities will come to you.
I'm curious, do you find sometimes in modern EDM that sub-bass frequencies produce tones outside of the key, whether intentionally or not? One of my biggest complaints about Skrillex used to be that the timbres he combined, but I'm starting to wonder whether or not it has to do with subharmonic frequencies. Could the two create an issue with tonality, like the overtone series clashing?
That definitely can happen, and I know that a lot of producers are very privy to that understanding, because modern EDM tones definitely can generate a lot of upper harmonics that definitely might not necessarily be in the key. But at the same time, they are very aware of this sort of thing because that's the effect that they're going for. It's a little bit more percussive and timbral rather than necessarily tonal. It's a spectral understanding of the music versus a harmonic understanding of the music. And that's something that's a very contemporary idea in 20th century modernism anyway. So you could say that, hey, Skrillex is a 20th century modernist. There we go.
I must be a prodigy to this polytonal thing, always singing a half step down. Now I know why.
One of the big things that you have to learn about music is that it's all about intent. If your intent is to sing a half step down, just hit that half step with as much gusto as you can, and it will come across to the audience as something intentional and something musical.
I found this awesome all-in-one cheat for Mahjong.
Oh my god, thank you, Spambot. Thank you for that Mahjong cheat. I really needed it.
How can I learn songs quickly? I'm gonna start doing weddings and the agency's lists are huge.
The answer is you can't. It takes a long time to learn that many songs. It took me like a full month of working on it basically every day to get through my agency's list. The thing I will suggest is to write everything out, to chart everything that you possibly can out onto a hard medium, whether it be writing it out in Sibelius or Finale or in a notebook or something. Be as detailed as you can with charts, because that way you don't actually have to remember everything. You have it there on the piece of paper that you can later access, and that is invaluable for those sorts of gigs.
Hey Adam, I wonder how you feel about working with people who aren't as educated or trained musically. Do you ever end up in performances or groups like that, or do the people in your network generally avoid hiring someone without a music degree? Obviously I'm asking because I'm one of those people, and I'm always super intimidated playing around real musicians. In general, I find them to be encouraging in person or casual conversation, but they don't exactly go out of their way to gig or jam with the less experienced.
So yeah, it's true. I definitely am not going to seek out opportunities to play with musicians who are less experienced than me. A great piece of advice I was once given is to always make sure that you are the least experienced musician in the room. You always want to make sure that you're playing with people better than you, or at least as good as you, because you have the greatest chance of musical growth. That said, I'm not necessarily going to be a dick to anybody or vibe anybody who might not necessarily have the same experience as I do, and I certainly won't care whether or not you went to music school, because honestly, nobody cares. Nobody cares about that fact.
Adam, thanks for introducing me to Ben Levin. He's really great. Would you work with him more in the future, / do you two stay in contact? Not just working on videos, but on some type of actual music. You two are both in those genreless experimental bands in a similar vein, Ben Levin Group and Sungazer, not to mention the incredible chops you both have on your instruments. It would be really interesting to see you two collaborate on some kind of composition.
So yes, Sungazer and Ben Levin did do a collaboration about 2 years ago. It's a rather odd collaboration, I will say. Ben Levin was promoting the Fishman triple play MIDI pickup, and we did this sort of visualization sort of experiment thing. I've linked to it in the description, but it was a lot of fun, and it is kind of a cool combination of our two individual styles, so definitely check it out.
How did you do the visuals? They're so damn cool. Been researching for ages, but can't get the grasp of it. All go, great track.
So I used a program called Arena, which is really awesome for controlling visuals with MIDI data, which is really powerful because you can take MIDI data from something like Ableton Live and then feed it over to Arena and then have that MIDI data trigger like visual clips. And basically I just downloaded and ripped a bunch of vaporwave type clips from YouTube, and then using a combination of a whole bunch of things that I kind of forget at this point, I basically routed Sean's drum triggers, acoustic drum triggers, through Ableton Live and then out through Arena, and then it spat out all sorts of weird stuff as he was playing the drums, and that was really awesome. It's a really fun thing that we're trying to incorporate into the Sungazer live show, so stay tuned for some of that.
Hey Adam, talking about fun music talk channels geared towards drummers, have you heard of or seen Dave King's channel Rational Funk? He sadly is no longer active on the channel, but I still love rewatching his videos. It's mostly a really silly parody of educational drum videos on YouTube, but sometimes there's gold in what he's talking about, even if it's in a very humorous context. Check it out if you haven't.
Dave King's channel is freaking amazing because I don't even know how to really classify it, because it's definitely a parody of drum educational videos, but it's like somehow more valuable than any drum educational video I've ever really seen, because he gets into some pretty crazy advanced stuff and some pretty topical stuff, but somehow as this weird character. I don't know. It's great. I wish he was posting more often, but yeah, the stuff that's up there is pretty hilarious.
Have you heard Periphery's new album? And if so, have you seen Nolly's playthrough of Prayer Position? It's a really fun song.
Adam Nolly Get Good has the most ridiculous bass tone for metal I've ever heard, and it's kind of like, for a long time I kind of fancied myself as a jack of all trades. I can play metal bass, sure, whatever. And then I heard his tone and I'm like, no, I can't. Wow, these guys have thought through their tone a lot more than I ever possibly could for metal, and it's really inspiring. Holy crap, tone. Just tone for days. Awesome stuff.
I just found this and thought about Adam's video going through his routine. I can see how people don't mind living in smaller spaces in New York after seeing how active musicians have to be through multiple avenues of income to make a living.
Link in the description. Yeah, so I did check out that article. I found it amusing. Basically what it is this musician is living in this like tiny attic like space above a performance venue, and it's like really grungy and terrible, and he's paying $400 a month. I don't know of anybody who actually does anything like that. Instead, what most people end up doing is they find like 3 or 4 roommates, get a loft out in Bushwick, and then end up paying like $600 or $700 a month or something relatively reasonable to live in New York. So if you're coming to New York for music, there are reasonable ways to live. Nothing like that. And as you can see here, I'm not living in a crawl space. This is a reasonable apartment. It does exist.
Hey Adam, great channel, very entertaining. I was wondering what software you use for video editing. After seeing this video, I actually would love to start a channel focused on keys. I feel like my approach and perspective on keyboard/piano might be valuable for others. Thanks.
That's awesome. I would strongly encourage you to start whatever channel you can, because man, the more the merrier. There's a lot of great channels out there, but I think there could be a lot more. There's definitely a niche to be explored. The video editing software that I use is Final Cut Pro. It's so easy that even a musician could use it.
High pass. Great video as ever.
Yes, I know, I meant to say high pass, but instead I kept saying low pass. All of you audiophiles were very pissed off at me. I'm very sorry about that. Please accept my apology.
You mentioned Rob Chapman and gears, and that made me think of Emmett Chapman, inventor of the Chapman stick. As a bass player, have you considered picking up the instrument yourself? Do you have any thoughts on the way it sounds, its application as a gigging instrument? Also, have you met any New Yorkers that play it? If so, what context is it usually in? Would love to hear your thoughts.
I have seen one Chapman stick in New York City, and it was packed up and in the corner of a producer and guitarist that I know, and he let me play it, and it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. But there's a reason why I've only seen one, and it's because the Chapman stick is something that's very niche. Basically, you have to like really commit to playing the Chapman stick because it takes a long time to actually learn and master. And then there are very few opportunities to actually play it beyond just being the solo Chapman stick person. I suppose it could work if somebody came along and like really mastered the Chapman stick and everything about it, but I just don't see it very often.
Hi Adam, I'm a tubist primarily and also play bass on the side, and I was wondering, how do you protect your equipment when traveling through New York City, especially through public transit? Seeing as you're visibly carrying an instrument around a large metro area, do you ever worry about theft? I've never lived in the big city, but I've been looking at a few different grad schools in metro areas, and the thought of carrying an instrument.
So I find that kind of funny for two reasons. The first is that it is not 1985 anymore in New York City, so you do not need to worry about having your stuff stolen on public transit. The NYPD is everywhere. You have people who take their $2,000 MacBook Pros and work on the subway all the time. I wouldn't do that, but hey, there are so many people out there doing it, and they must not be having any problems, so hey, maybe it's safe to do that. The second reason is you are a tuba player. Nobody cares about tuba. Seriously, nobody cares about tuba. Few people care about guitar or bass. Like, it's just a thing that is in a person's way, and most people are just trying to get around you because you're walking slowly because you're carrying a tuba. The only time I've ever had an instrument stolen from me was in suburban Maryland out of the back of my parents' minivan. So long as you use common sense and have an eye on your stuff, you have nothing to worry about. Anyway, that's the end of this episode of Question and Answer Time with Adam Neely. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I have a new video coming out every week, and thank you so much to these people who are my Patreon patrons. It's really humbling that everybody would support me. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.